Okay, come on, come on, come on. During the last election campaign, I was asked to introduce Aaron at a meeting out in Quebec, and I described him that night as a leader who was steady, strong, and visionary. That remains true today. And the next time, wait for it, the next time Aaron O'Toole is here and is introduced, you will have to say, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, who was here as well but Hal Jackman, sitting right here, the former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. This is not widely known, but I began in politics with Hal Jackman and Ted Rogers in Ottawa, Ontario, on the 9th of December, 1956, at the leadership convention that chose John Diefenbaker as our leader. Ted Rogers and Hal Jackman were chairman of the Youth for Diefenbaker Committee, and I was one of the workers up from Antigonish, Nova Scotia. I took the bloody train about 22 hours. But that was before the CN was privatized. So I came up and went to work for my co-chairman, Hal Jackman and Ted Rogers. So I said, Hal, what do I do? And he said, Brian, you put up posters. Fine. I went out. It was the biggest bloody snowstorm in modern history in Ottawa, cold as hell, and here I am putting up posters all over town with my little team. Did a hell of a job, if I may say. I came back to the suite in the Chateau Laurier Hotel. I was 17 at the time. And I come back, and Hal and Ted were there. And I said, I finished the job, Hal, what do I do? And I think that, quite frankly, on the basis of my work, I'll probably be promoted to policy advisor or something. So I said to Hal, I'm finished. What do I do? And Hal said, Brian, you've done a terrific job. What you do now, put up more posters. So we blanketed the city, and I always thought that John Diefenbaker owed me a big debt of gratitude because of that blanket job we did in Ottawa. Well, this is a tribute to Sir Winston, of course, and Mila and I were honored to know his daughter, Mary Soames. And in fact, Conrad is here. And I can remember the last time we had dinner with Mary. It was Conrad was with us. And that was at David Metcalfe's home in London. And she was a marvelous Churchill, a huge defender of Sir Winston. We knew, Mila and I knew, of course, Nicholas Soames, went on many holidays with him, the grandson, Winston Churchill's grandson, Sir Nicholas Soames. And of course, Winston Churchill, the other grandson, whom we knew well in London and Palm Beach and New York. And last time I saw Winston, after he got cancer, Mila and I went to see him at his apartment in New York. And he was clearly on his way out, but he remained just as irrepressible and humorous and good-natured as his grandfather. So, while my ties to Churchill are not enormous, it was a great privilege for Mila and me to know the family quite well in certain circumstances and to understand what a truly great man their father and grandfather was, and to hear about it firsthand, which was a thrill for both of us. Now, I have to tell you that when I hear a warm reception, such as the one tonight, one thought goes through my mind. Is it too late for a comeback? I mean, what the hell? I remember, well, you know, I thought about it again the other day, and as Conrad, who was a great expert in British history, would confirm, Gladstone led his way to his fourth government. He was 82, for God's sake. And you know what? I stopped and thought, I'm 82 too. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I remember watching one of my successors on television. It was a Saturday afternoon, and he was in Israel. And Neil and I were in our den at 47 Forden Crescent at the time in Westmount. We were watching this performance at a press conference. And the Prime Minister of Canada was asked, well, what is your solution for the Israeli-Palestinian crisis? And our distinguished Prime Minister said, well, don't ask me. I don't even know if I'm in North, South, East, or West Jerusalem. So I'm sitting here, Mila's over there. I'm looking at the tube, and I said, you know, Mila, this guy's so bloody bad. I'm going to get myself elected leader of the party again and come back as Prime Minister. There was total silence. So I turned and I said, did you hear what I said, dear? And she said, oh, yeah, I heard all right. And I said, well, what do you think? She said, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I know your new wife is really going to love the experience. Yeah. But as Aaron and all the other elected people here know, you wonder why the hell will we put up this brutality on the social media and criticism every day, where you see, as Brian Tobin and I and Nunciata and Pauline and others who were there at our time, you wake up in the morning and you see, unlike the private sector, you see your errors or even your non-errors laid out critically on the front page of the newspapers. You go, why the hell would I ever do this? Or why would young people come into that now? Well, the answer is, you know, in my case, I miss the adulation. And when you get right down to it, we truly understand the fact that there's a profound gratitude in each elector when he considers your service to our great country. For example, when I retired, 3 months later, a guy showed up in front of 24 Sussex, and he said to the GRC, the RCMP, who was in front of 24 Sussex, guarding the Prime Minister and his family. He goes up to him, he's from Red Deer. He goes up and he says, I'd like to see Prime Minister Mulrooney. And the guard says, I'm sorry, Brian Mulroney is no longer Prime Minister. Ah, okay, he leaves, takes off. He comes back the next day and says to the same guard, I'd like to see Prime Minister Mulroney. The guy said, I'm sorry, Brian Mulroney is no longer Prime Minister. The next day, believe it or not, the same guy comes back and he says to the same guard, I want to see Prime Minister Mulroney. The guy said, I've already told you. Don't you understand? Brian Mulroney is no longer Prime Minister. And the guy says, oh, I understand it all right. I just enjoy hearing it. So it was that our friend, Mr. Churchill, was going to be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Eisenhower. And it was decided to hold it in Bermuda because Prime Minister Churchill could no longer travel the way he was. He was quite weak. at the time. And President Eisenhower called the senior senator from North Carolina, who was a huge Churchill fan. And he said, Charlie, we're giving the Prime Minister in Bermuda the Medal of Honor, and I'm going to invite you to introduce him. However, he's not well, and your introduction has to be limited to 3 minutes, not a second more. Do I have your word on that? And the senator says, yes, of course, Mr. President. Well, he said, you can join me on Air Force One with the others, and we're going to go down and honor this great man, which they did. And when it came time for the senator to speak, he got up and proposed a toast and an invitation to Churchill. And he said, you know, it's said that Oxford and Cambridge are the greatest universities in the world, but I'm from Yale. I'm a Yale graduate, and I'm here to tell you as well, Yale is the greatest university in the world. Everybody was pretty nonplussed at this, and he said, he went on for 42 minutes. Some of the excerpts were, for example, Yale, Y-L-E, Y-A-L-E. Y is for youth, 5 minutes. A is for ambition, 5 minutes. L is for life, productive life, 5 minutes. E is for enterprise. Finally, the whole room is just about ready to collapse. And he says 30 seconds to introduce Churchill, who then staggers up because he's elderly and he's tired and he's fatigued with this 43-minute speech. Churchill gets up and he says, well, Senator, I want to thank you very much for your kind words about me and your informative comments about Yale, Y-A-L-E. Churchill says, all I can say, Senator, it's a damn good thing that you didn't graduate from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Well, as a long-serving Prime Minister, I've spoken often on Churchill, the greatest political leader in modern history. Tonight, I'd like to share with you some of the views I have held and spoken of for many years, and which I still hold, unchanged over the decades. It is daunting to say anything new or fresh about a man about whom so much has been written, including so much by Sir Winston himself. There is ample reason why Churchill continues to attract admiration around the world. He was the paragon of leadership during the darkest period of Britain's history. With unrelenting vigor and tenacity of purpose, he triumphed against all odds, and every single one of us in this room and elsewhere today are beneficiaries of his leadership. No British Prime Minister, not either Pitt nor even Disraeli, had such a tumultuous career. His motto was, never despair, and he never did, showing superhuman determination, not only over adversity, but over self-doubt, depression, betrayal, armed combat, and mortal international danger. Churchill used his unique mastery of the English language to rally his island nation and the Commonwealth, including Canada, against the imminent, seemingly unstoppable threat of Hitler's Nazis, who had swept through Western Europe and were on the verge of enslaving the entire continent, and then had the hope of enslaving the rest of us here in North America. When Winston Churchill took the helm of the British government in May 1940, few, very few, anywhere, had much hope of success, his or theirs. But his indomitable courage his unbridled optimism, his bristling speeches, and his undiluted confidence made him not only the right man at the right time, but also the most consequential leader in modern history. That is what we honor tonight. Churchill a été une figure marquante sur la scène mondiale. Son érudition, tant en littérature qu'en histoire, son expérience de journaliste et d'écrivain, d'officier militaire, de peintre et de politicien, et surtout ses grands talents d'orateur ont alimenté sa vision stratégique et sa détermination en tant que leader en situation de crise extrême. Il était imaginatif et visionnaire pour ce qui touchait la géopolitique, et lorsqu'il commettait des erreurs de jugement, il rajustait rapidement le tir en fonction des faits, sans gêne ou amertume. His persistent and ultimately successful overtures to Roosevelt and his complex but necessary alliance with Stalin became the ultimate catalyst for victory. A delicate and essential balance of power and personalities that prevailed over a seemingly invincible foe. He used words more powerfully than any weapon. They were, in fact, his own personal arsenal. And when the war was over and won, he picked up his pen and wrote a personal memoir that stands today as a brilliant record of what happened as witnessed from the catbird seat of government. In fact, when Churchill was once asked, "Prime Minister, how do you think history is going to treat you?" Churchill said, "I think it's going to treat me very well, because I plan to write it myself." Well, his sense of humor rarely deserted him. He once observed, "I have often had to eat my words, and on the whole, I found them to be a nourishing diet." Adding with a smile, "I live from mouth to hand." Well, Churchill was no stranger to setbacks. He was not always right, but his ever-loyal wife, Clemmy, stated to Asquith in Churchill's defense, "He has the supreme quality very few of your present or future cabinet ministers possess, namely the power and imagination and the deadliness to fight Germany." And this was in 1950. Churchill's black dog moments never obscured his focus or his confidence. He made the World War II struggle seem not merely essential for national survival, but worthwhile and noble. Despite a spate of initial military defeats and increasing damage and deprivation on the home front, he evoked persistent cheerfulness among his people. His was the authentic voice of leadership and defiance. He genuinely liked people, and they in turn liked him, kind of sort of like me. His common touch with those suffering from the heavy bombing in London is evident from his direct answer to a resident on the scene. When a guy yelled out, "When are we going to bomb Berlin, Winnie?" "You leave that to me," he said. Not with the equivocal, "Well, as soon as we are able, not just yet." "You leave that to me." With clarity and conviction, the unpredictable magic that was able to transform the despondent misery of disaster into a grimly certain but absolute stepping stone to victory. "Britain," he said, "is a nation with the heart of a lion, and I had the luck to be called upon to give it the roar." When Time magazine named him its man of the half-century in June 1950, they described his role as follows. Churchill's chief contribution was to warn of the rocks ahead and to lead the rescue parties. He was not the man who designed the ship. What he did was launch the lifeboats. That a free world survived in 1950 with a hope of more progress and less calamity was due almost entirely to Churchill's exertions. After the war, and while serving as Britain's leader of the opposition, Churchill used the power of his words and his incredible vision to stimulate attention and galvanize action against both the devastation of Europe and the threat of Soviet Russia. His famous Iron Curtain speech, orchestrated carefully with the U.S. President Harry Truman in Truman's home state of Missouri, inspired both the Marshall Plan that resurrected and saved the economies of Western Europe for that generation and generations to come, and the NATO alliance that helped make Europe secure then and to this very day. Churchill's prescience about world affairs and his magical ability to act decisively in the face of overwhelming challenge sparkles throughout his career. It is the enduring foundation of his proud legacy. The magnificent oratory of Churchill registers still today. While many examples are well known, I can't resist sharing a few gems with you tonight. In May of 1935, he offered a somber yet prescient view of what was to come. When the situation was manageable, it was neglected. Now that it is thoroughly out of hand, we apply too late the remedies which then might have effected a cure. Nothing new in this story. Until the emergency comes, until self-preservation strikes its jarring gong. These are the features that constitute the endless repetition of history. After Munich, and while he was still on the outs with his own government, Churchill stated more trenchantly, Britain and France had to choose between war and dishonor. They chose dishonor. There will be war. On first becoming Prime Minister in May of 1940, he echoed Pitt and defined his objective. What is our policy? It is to wage war by sea, land, and air with all our might and with all the strength that God has given us. To wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark, lamentable human catalog of crime. That is our policy. Our aim is, in one word, victory. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, however long and hard the road may be. For without victory, there is no survival. And in June of 1940, after Dunkirk, in the very dark days of British history, Churchill went to Parliament the next day and said, with disaster all over the place and predictions for the end imminent, Churchill went to Parliament and said, we shall not flag or fail. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We will fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. And we shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender until in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forward to the liberation and rescue of the old. The great parliamentary diarist Harold Nicolson declared, this was the finest speech I have ever heard. Assessments of Churchill's place in history are similarly legendary and colorful. Isaiah Berlin captured the essence of Churchill in this way: a gigantic historical figure in his own lifetime, superhumanly bold, strongly imaginative, an actor of prodigious power, the savior of his country, a mythical hero who belongs to the legend as much as to reality, the largest human being of our time. H. Asquith, who had an even more direct experience with Churchill, described him as a wonderful creature with a curious dash of boyhood simplicity, and what someone once said of genius, a zigzag strike of lightning to the brain. Le général Charles de Gaulle, habituellement avare de compliments, a écrit dans ses mémoires: Winston Churchill m'a paru d'un bout à l'autre du drame, comme le grand champion d'une grande entreprise et le grand artiste d'une grande histoire. Il était, de par son caractère, fait pour agir, risquer, jouer le rôle, très carrément et sans scrupule. Il jouait de ce don angélique et diabolique pour roumer la lourde pâte anglaise, aussi bien que pour frapper l'esprit des étrangers. Churchill was never vindictive. His motto was clear but balanced, and you know it all. In war, resolution. In defeat, defiance. In victory, magnanimity. And in peace, goodwill. He was a prodigious writer of dynamic power and energy, more than 10 million words in print, and a recording angel of striking ruthlessness. When he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953, the presenter signaled that Churchill's political and literary achievements are of such magnitude and importance that one is tempted to portray him as a Caesar who also has the pen of Cicero. Never before has one of history's leading figures been so close by virtue of such an outstanding combination. His profound experience is unmistakable. He is the man who himself has been through the terrible fires, taken risks, and withstood extreme pressure. He was a rare breed of politician, combining the stern resolve and ruthless decision-making with persistent flashes of humanity and humor. And he concluded, the Nobel Literary Prize is intended to cast luster over the author. But here, it is the author who casts luster over the Nobel Prize. Spanning more than half a century, the statesman we honor this evening had many connections with Canada, which he described fondly as the Great Dominion. He visited 9 times, more often than to any other country other than the US and France. In his book, The Great Dominion, David Dilks observed, of no other Commonwealth country did Churchill have such a lifelong knowledge. In 1901 in Winnipeg, he first heard the news of Queen Victoria's death. After resigning along with the Baldwin government in 1929, he had an extensive vacation that summer in Canada. At Niagara Falls, he regretted that he had not tried to buy a concession there at Niagara Falls in 1900. When he returned with his daughter again in 1943, en route to Roosevelt's home at Hyde Park, New York, he was asked whether he noticed any differences from his first visit. Churchill said, well, the principle seems to be the same. The water still falls over the falls. And in 1929, speaking in Montreal, Churchill observed, how splendid is our common inheritance. It was with a thrill that after crossing for several days the great wastes of the Atlantic, I landed in a new world, in a new hemisphere, and found myself at home. Churchill described more pungently a dinner hosted by the government of Alberta that summer in High River. We had cold water and boring speeches until some kind friend put something better in my tumbler. Churchill spoke to Canada's Parliament on a more solemn occasion in the bleak days of December 1941. Despite the prevailing mood, he exuded confidence about the ultimate victory. Because the French General Weygand had told the last civilian premier of the Third Republic that, quote, in 3 weeks, Britain will have her neck wrung like a chicken, Churchill derisively retorted, some chicken, some neck. The gallery and the Parliament in Ottawa erupted in tumultuous applause. Margaret Lawrence, a noted Canadian author at the time, in her own right, wrote about the speech in the magazine Saturday Night. His voice is a gift from God. It has come from generations upon generations of culture and sensitivity and authority and human warmth. It uses the English of the King James period, powerful, direct, richly intoned. Yet it is simple. It is the English of poets, trained to take the shortest route to an idea, using the most perfect word and the unforgettable, courageously emotional phrases. Churchill, as Prime Minister, first met Franklin Roosevelt on the shores of Placentia Bay in Newfoundland in August 1941, 8 years before Newfoundland became part of Canada. Meeting Roosevelt that day, he declared, was like uncorking your first bottle of champagne. And by God, he knew about that. At that time, they agreed on 8 basic clauses that shaped the Atlantic Charter to this very day, laying the foundation for an alliance that would eventually win the war, and also establishing principles for future world order, including notably the right of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they choose to live. A noble understanding, to be sure, and one that resonates poignantly today as we and our allies confront new threats to global peace. In Quebec City in 1943 and again in 1944, Churchill met with Roosevelt and their respective chiefs of staff to plot the path to victory and give life to the Atlantic Charter and the formation of the United Nations. Britain did not stand alone against Nazi Germany. On September 10th, 1939, 1 week following Britain and 2 years before America, Canada's Parliament declared war on Germany. Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa joined as well. That was Canada's first independent declaration of war and the beginning of the largest combined national effort in our history. We may not have been directly engaged in shaping the war strategy, as our Prime Minister at the time, Mackenzie King, was as cautious and ambiguous as Churchill was bold and decisive. But our contribution and our sacrifice as Canadians was very, very substantial. From a population of 11 million at the time, over 1 million Canadians, mostly volunteers, served in uniform. Canada fielded the 4th largest air force and the 5th largest naval fleet in the entire world. We suffered some 100,000 casualties, half of whom are young Canadians, were killed in action. The compellingly unforgettable voice, the radio voice of Winston Churchill, tinged with courage and sacrifice and heroism, rang out across the 5,000 windswept miles of a young but pulsating Canada and became a clarion call to all to join the battle and they did so in record numbers. These were the farm boys from Saskatchewan, from the wheat fields of Saskatchewan, coal miners from the pits in Alberta and Nova Scotia, factory and paper mill workers from Ontario and Quebec, doctors, lawyers, teachers, nurses, and tradesmen from all parts of Canada, men and women, most of whom had seldom ventured beyond their local community, let alone across a vast ocean to begin a battle about which they knew little, and the results of which were absolutely uncertain. They were our most enduring asset, and they went off to war having heard from Churchill the noblest call of them all: freedom. Canada was the primary location for the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, the largest Air Force training plant in history. More than 140,000 personnel, including 50,000 pilots, were trained, more than half of whom were Canadians, and who served in the RCAF and the RAF. 1 out of 6 RAF bomber command groups flying in Europe were Canadian. Canadian servicemen and women matured quickly under fire. Their valor and their sacrifices paid dividends for us all in the Battle of Britain, the Atlantic convoys, the invasion of Italy, the D-Day landings in Normandy, and the liberations of France, Belgium, and Holland. In all of these magnificent moments of victory and strength and courage, Canada played a vital and important role. Canada's economic generosity throughout the war and well into the peace was absolutely unprecedented. With a population only 1/12 that of the U.S., Canada's financial gifts were 1/4 of the total Lend-Lease program from the United States of America throughout the entire war. That means that our gifts were more than 3 times greater on a per capita basis. The proportion of defense expenditures given away in terms of free supplies was higher from Canada than from any other country in the entire world. Canada was proud to contribute to this, the noblest cause of all. Canada heard from the voice of Churchill, knew of the hardship and sorrow visited upon his brave island homeland, and responded for king and country with a passion, courage, and generosity replicated only very, very infrequently in the golden history of great industrialized nations. After the war, our Prime Minister at the time, the great Louis Saint-Laurent, whose granddaughter is with us here tonight, the great Louis Saint-Laurent welcomed Churchill thus: "Your voice was the voice of human freedom and became the symbol of the unconquerable spirit of free men and women facing terrific odds. No man living," said Saint-Laurent, "has done more to bring about an association of hearts and minds between your fathers and your mothers' native lands." Responding to a toast in Canada in June 1952, Churchill offered this tribute to Canada: "There is no more spacious and splendid domain open to the activity and human genius of free men, with one hand clasping in enduring friendship the United States of America, and the other spread across the ocean in friendship to Britain and France." Leadership is not something learned in school. It is innate, an indelible mark of character steeped in integrity, courage, conviction, daring, and underscored by the moral imperative to do the right thing. There are many theories, of course, but what stands out are the lessons from real life, the skills, the choices, and the accomplishments of leaders like Churchill, whose singular experience and example shines brightly to this very day. One reason why his remarkable life remains so poignant is that we hear more today about dysfunction in democratic governments around the world these days than about achievement. But when you succumb to a gloomy outlook of where we might be, all of us heading, keep in mind the rousing oratory and the exceptional talents displayed by Churchill at a time when there were overwhelming grounds for despondency. The essential attribute for optimism and success now, as before, will be a strong, confident political leadership. That ineffable and sometimes magical quality that sets some men and women apart so that millions will follow them as they chart new visions and inspire their citizens to dream big and exciting dreams. As a contemporary observer noted some years ago, in a nation ruled by polls and ratings, public opinion polls, popularity polls, and ratings, where even newspapers hire focus groups to see what kind of news their readers want, we are losing sight of something we should have learned as teenagers. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it's right. In fact, transforming leadership that makes a significant difference in the life of a nation like Canada and elsewhere, recognizes that political capital is acquired to be spent, not hoarded, to be spent in great causes for one's country. That is precisely the lesson from Churchill. The Old Testament once observed that young men have visions and old men dream dreams. Well, a great country like Canada is entitled and requires a combination of visions and dreams to ensure that our children and grandchildren inherit the kind of land that we've always dreamed of and always worked for. So if all of us remember that freedom and liberty are the very pillars of our national democracy, we can collectively make a contribution to the well-being of mankind that will bring honor and peace and prosperity to all our citizens and glory to Canada. And that will remain our legacy and our heritage to our children and grandchildren and their children forever. Thank you. Oh, here we are. Hi, how are you, dear? How are you, please?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jillian Smith, and on behalf of the Churchill Society and all those in attendance tonight, it is my sincere honor to offer thanks to our speaker, the Right Honorable Brian Mulrooney, a man and a family who hold a very special place in my family's heart. Mr. Mulrooney, your words tonight speak to the power of grace in leadership. The parallels between your words tonight about Churchill and your life as our Prime Minister are undeniable. Doing the right thing every time. Many spoke tonight about your years of making difficult and daring decisions for Canada, and I would highlight the essential element in the mix. Those decisions were underscored by your deep and abiding compassion for Canadians. Clear-sighted as your policies were, they were tempered by profound humanity and humor. This legacy of being able to balance bravery, foresight, and compassion is perhaps one of your greatest. It has served as an example to today's leaders who in these pandemic times have had to grapple with making extremely tough choices on behalf of Torontonians, Ontarians, and Canadians. They have served us with the same palpable humanity and compassion that you offered us. Alors, Monsieur Mulrooney, c'est à nous de vous remercier. We honor you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. What a marvelous occasion to come together for the first time in 20 months or more. We celebrate tonight the life of Sir Winston Churchill, and we honor the life of a great Canadian who, on so many issues, on the economy, on racial equality, and on human rights, and on the environment, was on the right side of history. Mr. Mulroney, thank you. That concludes the formal the activities for the evening. We're done, but the bar is open and there's no hurry to leave. So thank you very much.